And I'm recording. All right, let's go.
Okay. All right. So when are we all gonna play Project Zomboid?
I'm going through a tunnel.
Wait, I've got to light my cigar before we start. So, fun fact. I bought this cigar, I guess I was with you, Daniel. Do you remember when I bought this $3 cigar?
No, I don't.
Oh, I bought a $3 cigar. Anyway, I was just talking to the cigar guy in Nacogdoches, and I was mentioning that, yeah, I got the cigar for like $3.99 or like $3 even or something, and he's like, really? I was like, yeah, I only bought it because I was interested in what it would do to my body if I inhaled it, considering the normal price point for a cigar is $8.99. So anyway, he said, I'll be right back. And he went to wherever he went to, and he came back with a cigar that looks incredibly misshapen. And he said, here, this is $3 even. I want you to smoke both of these, and I want you to tell me what you think of them. So we're gonna smoke those here.
Fun.
I also paid $120-something in whiskey today.
Why?
Tim, you don't know this. Because the price point for this whiskey, the Scotch, was $29.99. And I was trying to figure out what would be good for this book club, considering most of the fighting takes place in Kentucky. And like a voice on high, I saw the phrase Speyburn, Speyside single malt Scotch whiskey, companion cask, matured in a Kentucky bourbon cask. And I thought, wow, that is like just perfect. Guess what? It was actually $55. They mispriced it.
Ah, yes, you told me this.
Yes, but I paid for it anyway because I was really frustrated and the line was long and I wanted to leave.
Because you have no ability to stand up for your consumer rights. That's why.
Consume her? I hardly know her.
I knew that was coming. Anyway, so who read the first chapter of this?
I did.
What a chapter.
Oh shit, we only read chapter 1, huh?
Yeah, only chapter 1.
So, what are some general thoughts about the book? Did all of your concerns from the previous book come true?
I don't remember what my concerns from the previous book were, but honestly, I forgot, I guess, how long these chapters are. And my first impressions, I mean, the writing is obviously as good as the last book, I think. But man, there are a lot of characters this time around, I feel like. I don't know if it's because I just knew most of the characters from the last one as historical figures, but like, there just seem to be a lot this time. It's crazy.
Yeah.
They do jump around a lot with the characters.
I've got some news for you, buddies. Some of these characters are going to be with us for the entirety of this franchise. Some of them, not so much.
Is this franchise just World War I, or does it move on to World War II as well?
No. This for the entirety of this book series, which goes on to World War II. Some of these characters that you have met in these first 5 chapters will be throughout the entirety of the franchise.
Well, I guess that's a good thing.
And I wonder
if he introduced just like 50 new characters for just one single book, I would have been like, what the fuck?
And I wonder if one of these characters will eventually commit a genocide.
You wonder if one of these characters will commit a genocide?
Yeah, wouldn't that be wild?
I don't remember Hitler being introduced, but...
Well, but he's there somewhere. Hopefully this time he gets hit with an artillery shell.
I will remember you said
Well, it's interesting you say that, because if this book goes on to World War II, I'm assuming that must mean that Hitler does rise to power still, which must mean that Germany loses this war. And if Germany loses this war, the U.S. must lose this war as well, since they're allies. Which is interesting, considering these first 5 chapters, the U.S. is smoking the enemy.
Yeah, so that was one of the things I noticed right out of the bat, was every time they were mentioning battles, they were like, yeah, the US is like wiping the floor with them.
Yeah.
They're using that Chinaman strategy, just overwhelming with numbers.
Well, it's working.
Yeah.
I don't know if y'all noticed, but it seems like a lot of the things that are happening in this war are happening a lot faster in this timeline compared to the original timeline, World War One.
Mm-hmm.
Like the rapid use of machine guns, the like immediate, like out of the gate planes firing on each other.
Well, I don't know about that though, because I mean, with airplanes, clearly there isn't a air force per se, at least on the American front. There's just individual duels, I guess, so far.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, that's a bit faster, I guess. Just because there is air-to-air combat, but I feel like the progress has been pretty steady on so far. Because I mean, in the beginning, for example, we see some cavalry use in the first few battles, just like in our current history of World War One, that are absolutely well, the cavalry, while they achieve their objectives for the most part in this book, are absolutely decimated by modern weaponry and stuff. And I mean, machine guns were used from the beginning in World War One. They've been being used since the Boer War.
Maybe so.
So
What
I
are
don't
your
know.
thoughts?
I just wasn't seeing a discrepancy in time periods, aside from maybe the airplane issue. Um, and okay, maybe I'm not. Maybe I don't know my artillery well enough, but the what do they call it? Were they 6-pound pieces or something? Made me think that they're still using the like old Napoleonic artillery pieces instead of the fixed howitzers that you usually see from like World War One documentaries.
So they mentioned that, I don't remember what chapter it is, but they mention the Confederates are using French howitzers and how that they um, are superior to what they were using, like the Napoleonic era cannons, because they are more accurate, they're more stable, that sort of thing.
Right. But then, so those howitzers, I assume, are the regular World War One guns that we would see in a documentary.
That's what I assumed when I was reading them.
Okay, but then for example, like during the crossing of the Ohio, that chapter, when the CSA Monitor comes to absolutely wreck the transport barges, it's being attacked by the U.S. I forget what weight it was, but I feel like it's a 6-pounder, and the cannonballs are basically just bouncing off the iron hull of the Monitor.
Talking about
Like
the field artillery.
field artillery, right? Yeah. Was that like? Are they still using? Am I just don't know my artillery well enough? Or are they still using like those Civil War style cannons in this? Do you think?
I would have to look at it again because
I
I
mean,
thought that they were clear that they moved on, but maybe the wording was different from what I remember.
No, they've moved on because they talk about how much better the artillery is these days. I think that the reason that the Union was having so much trouble with that one ship was, first of all, they weren't for some reason, prepared for that sort of scenario. Like, I know they said they mined, like, the channels and stuff, but clearly someone fucked up in a major way. But I think that they didn't have, like, the heavy guns in place or ready for this sort of thing. And so they were just using the regular field artillery. That's what I got out of it. Like the smaller caliber guns.
Yeah.
But Tim, you were an artilleryman. Thank you for your service. So you should know all of this.
I'm trying to
Well,
look up right now.
they
I'm on the chapter. I'm trying to look up how exactly they describe the Union artillery. But you go ahead, Tim.
I thought they described them as 13-inch guns.
Was it 13-inch? That's the thing, is I can't remember if they said 13-inch or 6-pounders. Because 6-pounders makes me think of Napoleonic style artillery. That's why I'm confused, I guess, but maybe I'm just misremembering. Let me see.
Oh, I might have been thinking of when they were talking about the ships, because a 13-inch gun is a naval cannon.
Yeah, that sounds. Yeah.
They were talking about how they didn't have naval guns that could match the monitor that they had, the Confederate side.
Speaking of naval guns, I'm still searching, but now that you mention it, it's just funny. I love how the Brits had their own little Pearl Harbor event.
Yes.
That
I
was
was
funny.
waiting to talk about that. I
That was
thought
a funny
The
parallel.
Sandwich Islands.
the Sandwich Islands, yeah.
Such a stupid name. Such a British name. Fucking idiots.
But I was waiting to talk about that because when I first started reading about it, I was like, wait a second, this is too early. This is the wrong war. What's going on?
What year is it? So what are y'all thoughts so far on the Sandwich Islands campaign? I know we've only gotten like a couple like pages of it, but
once again, you know, the United States are just rolling them. And I mean, I don't get it. Like, they were getting smashed in the last book, and now suddenly they're by and large winning.
Yeah, I mean,
So
it's clear their alliance with Germany is paying dividends and stuff. I did think that it was pretty interesting, I guess, that Turtledove chose to make the Royal Navy seem a little more incompetent in this alternate history, because as far as I know, in World War One, the Royal Navy was still pretty top notch. They won most of their battles against the German Navy.
how many battles were there, you think?
Not many, but they won all.
Yeah. So something I will point out is that the big issue for Germany was they didn't have the manpower to match the other countries.
Or the resources.
But you know who has a lot of people and a lot of resources?
Yeah, but I don't know. They're also on the other side of the world from Britain.
Well, I'm just saying, like German engineering plus American cannon fodder might mean something.
I guess.
Yeah.
Do you have any leading questions, Chris?
Oh, I have many. So so they mentioned like as long as the British don't like come reinforced before they can secure the islands, the Americans will win. Do you think that they're going to seize these Sandwich Islands?
Well,
You said as long as
they.
Sorry, go ahead. Go ahead.
Oh, well, no. He was saying that as long as they don't have time to reinforce, that they should be able to hold them.
Mm-hmm.
Currently, I don't really see the value in holding them, though.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So
So
back
they,
then, go ahead.
well, I was gonna say they can take them, but again, at least for the moment, as I see it, there's no real strategic value in holding them because they're not really doing anything with them.
So the big reason that the Sandwich Islands are important is back in these days, all these ships are powered by coal, and you can only carry so much coal on a ship. And so what you had to do is you had to have resupply islands. Essentially, you had to have places where your ships could pick up coal, and it kind of seems like that's the importance of the Hawaiian Islands here for the United States, that they can branch outward from this.
That's a
But if
huge
the
supply line to bring coal from the mainland to Hawaii.
Well, the idea is the coal is already in Hawaii, and so like it's stored up there so that they can make sorties from Hawaii to the United States.
Oh, the British might have a storage there, but the U.S. would have to resupply it eventually, because I'm sure coal is not native to Hawaii.
Well, right. It seemed like, because I remember some quote from the book saying like, if we don't take these islands, then they'll be going up and down the coasts of California and stuff.
Yeah.
And I think this is the British forward operation base.
No. It's interesting though, because there's a lot of importance clearly put in in Hawaii. I'm gonna call it Hawaii because the Sandwich Islands is a stupid name. But and I get it as like converting it into your own forward operating base so that you can strike at the British colonies in India and Australia.
Mm-hmm.
And while those colonies were important to the British Empire, I just don't feel like they were important enough for such a focus. Like like
Well,
harassing Australia or India wasn't gonna won't win the war for the Americans. I feel like, you know.
well, I believe India was incredibly important to the British, because that's like the crown jewel of the empire. That's where they get so
Yeah,
much of their resources and
that's
so
what
much
it's
of their
known
stuff.
as. But then in real history, you look at how they defended India, especially during World War II, and it was abysmally under garrisoned and under defended.
But that's World War II. This is World War One.
Oh, I know, but it's still those wars are only like 30 years, no, 20 to 30 years apart, and you know, India would still be considered the crown jewel at that point.
Yeah.
I mean, it would be almost some of the last vestiges of the British Empire. You know, they would have wanted to hold on to India.
Yeah.
But
Something I will say that this series does is it makes history rhyme. So an example of a rhyme would be, "Oh, the Americans sneak attack Pearl Harbor."
Mm-hmm.
You will probably detect a lot of rhymes in this. I am just so disappointed that I decided to cut us off here at this chapter because we have not talked about the Mormons.
Oh my gosh, I totally forgot about them. I didn't even realize
So
that they
did the
haven't been spoken of
United
yet.
States. I sure hope they don't cause any trouble.
Oh, okay, yeah. I was thinking things were going way too smoothly for the Union. I totally forgot that was a problem child for them.
So the United States is making ground, like, and Canada is just mopping the fucking floor with those Canucks. Like, what I was sitting at Jack at the Fredonia Brewery, and I was telling him about these books, and he said he's actually going to start reading them because of what I was telling him about. He read Guns of the South,
Yeah.
the Academy Award winning book where a bunch of racist South Africans go back in time and give Robert E. Lee AK-47s. He read that book and he thought it was pretty good. I said, "Hey, you should read a book series that's not about time travel." And he said, "Oh, well, I'll read the first book. He's gonna read How Few Remain, and I'll check back with him in a bit."
Yeah.
But yeah, so when I was talking to him right before he started talking to me at the bar, I was listening to, I think it was McGregor, the guy in Manitoba, that was grumbling about how the Americans were already issuing American stamps for all the letters instead of the British ones.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought that was great.
Wasn't it also that they were, oh, I don't remember the location of it. In addition to like the stamps, they were doing different currencies. Like they had the green and gray United States dollars, but then they had like the Confederate scrip
That
they were
was
using.
That's in DC.
Covington, Kentucky. No, that was yes, but also Covington. That part you're talking about is Covington in Kentucky, because they trade in both scripts because they're a border town.
Yeah, yeah, and how they were saying that the script was everyone was using it because it got like compared to the dollar, it was like 20 cents for a script, and so its value was just outrageous. But they also over flooded it, and so yeah, just something I noted.
Mm-hmm. Something else I noted talking about colors. I like how they're talking about how the Confederate khaki is helping them in some aspects of the war, while the U.S. color is helping them in others. I don't know if y'all picked up on that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
What are the? Sorry. Go ahead.
Go ahead. Okay. So the butternut, because they refuse to call it khaki for whatever reason. The butternut seems to be helping them in like, I guess the flatter states, I guess is the easiest
and the
way to say it.
craters and the mud.
Yeah. But like up north in the more hilled areas, the more wooded areas, the green gray of the U.S. uniform seems to be helping them out way better.
Mm-hmm. And it's shocking that neither side had found it prudent to just make regular camouflage colors yet.
Well, I mean, in real
we didn't
World
have
War
camouflage
One, they
in World War
still
One
very
anyway.
much were. Yeah, they were still very much, colors had certain meanings for different units, or they had different histories, and so they still hadn't, realized that wearing, a giant red hat or a, bright blue blazer was not strategically valuable.
Yeah. I mean, the French were still charging across trenches in blue overcoats, like bright blue overcoats. Fucking idiots.
That's what Custard wants to do.
Oh yeah! Oh my God,
Oh,
Custard, dude!
Custer. Oh
what
my
an
God.
idiot! What an imbecile!
I mean, but they kind of
Talk
play
about
him
a
up as
boomer.
that. Yeah. But just every moment he's, like, I just imagine jowls flapping in the wind anytime he talks.
Yeah. Yeah, man, Custer. What a person.
Have
He's
they
become.
specifically set an age for him, or do they just keep mentioning him as like an old fat guy?
I'm sure we could look up. Let's see. What year does the war start in?
19. I mean, you just have to look up his birth date, and 1914 is the start of World War One. Still here. Let's see. I'm looking it up too. He was born 39. So, oh wow, he would have been old then.
Oh yeah, he would have been probably in his 80s if, at the very
61.
least.
61 plus 14. 75. He's 75 years old at the start of World War One.
75 years young.
No, he's old.
Ancient. Wow, I'm actually kind of surprised by that. I thought he was in his young 20s during the Civil War.
No, because the only one that was young in the last book was Teddy, I looked it up because I was trying to convince Jack to read this book series, and I said, "Let me look up how old Teddy is. He's 24 in the last book."
Yeah. Well, I knew Teddy was younger than Custer because that war happens in the 1880s. So if Custer was, as I thought, in his 20s in the Civil War, he would have been in his 40s in the Second Mexican War.
Mm-hmm.
But no, he was older than that. So whatever. Yeah, Custer, I think, is going to be another big thorn in the Union war effort. Because
Yeah.
am I correct in connecting the points that he's in charge of the crossing of the Ohio into Kentucky?
Yes, he is.
Okay, so he's in charge of that front. So obviously we haven't gotten to there yet, but the last time we were with him in these 5 chapters, his focus on using cavalry for some grand offensive or something, that's clearly foreshadowing to backfire tremendously, and I think that's going to cause the Union to start having a little bit of a retreat from Kentucky.
Yeah. Yeah, the Union's been making a lot of. That's something that was really illuminating compared to last time, because the last book they fought in Kentucky too.
Yeah.
But they got bogged down immediately.
Yeah, they did not. I thought it was funny. They did not want to try crossing into Louisville this time.
No, they said, fuck that. And so, like, they've made several successful crossings into Kentucky in this book. But yeah, Custard is absolutely obsessed with cavalry, and I'm glad you're recording this because this will illuminate things in the future, his obsession with cavalry and what that might lead to in this series.
Man, yeah. He's gonna direct cavalry to do a whole right at the Rohirrim to a line of machine guns, I'm sure, or something like that.
And the subtleties, if you've caught it, like in the previous book, Custard did not drink alcohol except for like occasionally because his wife wouldn't let him.
Oh yeah, now he's clearly an alcoholic.
They say like every time he opens his mouth, there's like a wave of fumes that come out.
Which is like, that's how that last book ends, with him just like drinking heavily.
Yeah.
So I guess you get to see what happens when you do that.
You live to the ripe age of 75, still in command
I guess.
a part of the military.
One of the highest ranked generals in the United States Army.
Let's do it.
Yeah.
That's encouragement if I've ever heard of it.
Yeah, one can only hope. So what are y'all's thoughts on like the changes of the American culture? There are a lot of very stark changes, I would argue.
So hold on. I'm blanking. Give me an example.
There's clearly a much more German influence in American society in terms of how heavily, I guess, regulated everything is, because there's an example of that, I think, in the American occupation of Canada, that the Americans start to enforce like everything having a form being filled out. You can't do anything without paperwork being done and turned in at the proper places and yada yada yada. And that seems to be a regular part of American society life as well. And on the opposite end of that, of course, there's a much larger socialist movement that socialism is seen as a more, I guess, common thing to see. And even though in this case it's not as a conflicting factor in society, because the socialists are joining in the cause for the war in the beginning with everybody else in approving war funds and stuff, they're still clearly much more powerful than in real history and influencing society in that way. That's all I know. So I don't know. Shit.
And so something tied to that I noticed about like, well, why are the socialists like supporting this imperialist war, so to speak? And something that I like that it touched on is like all of these socialist strongholds also happen to be bordering like Canada.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's kind of why they're all so hawkish about this. Usually they're socialist, but like when you've got a neighbor right next door to your state, you're probably just gonna kind of close one eye to that and just focus on like perseverance.
Also, I like, as a side note, how everybody seems to be wanting to have the Wilhelm mustache.
Mm-hmm. That's if you've noticed, like they talk about the facial hair in this. All the Americans have the Kaiser stash,
Yep.
and all of the Southerners they've got like the King George stash.
Oh, I didn't know the Southerner. I didn't recognize the Southerner thing about facial
They
hair.
said something about like the stash like King George, like they're all modeling after their European allies.
Yeah.
I didn't pick that up. I must have missed that. That's kind of funny though, seeing as how their influence is spreading even beyond just like supplies, but
Mm-hmm.
as mentioned earlier, the cultures are being transferred
Just
over, and I
their
guess the
war.
styles.
Yeah. I mean, it's so the culture of the unions of the Union Americans is so drastically different that now the Confederates don't even recognize the North as being American anymore.
Hmm. Oh, one thing I wanted to touch on is that I don't know if I didn't separate my notes by chapter. It's just kind of all in here, but it might have been during like the preface.
Mm-hmm.
But the British persuaded the Confederacy to release their slaves,
Yeah,
and I was like, hold on, but that was like the whole point, so I didn't get that.
so that's what happened at the end of the last book.
Yeah, I
Oh,
think you misread something in the preface, because the preface
okay.
was about um the British diplomat convincing Lincoln to give up the Civil War, the first one, the War of Secession, because of his
Okay, I must have
losses.
misread something then.
Yeah, yeah. And so at that point, the South would have still had slaves. It's not until the Second Mexican War that Britain and France convinced the Confederacy to give up their slaves if they went for their
So,
support. You know.
and so what Lincoln says to Lord Lyons is like, well, you see, here in my desk, I've got this Emancipation Proclamation thing, and if I could release this, maybe, and Lord Lyons is like, that'd just be sour grapes. Like that would just be, it'd be a bitch move. Like you're losing on all of the fronts, and then suddenly it's about slavery now. Suddenly it's about the blacks. Absolutely not. No one would like that.
Lincoln's like, you want to see what's in my pants? I got it.
Did you catch the readings of Lincoln that were being passed around in the South? By the way,
The what?
the readings of Abraham Lincoln being passed around in the South. Read Lincoln.
Oh, was that Lincoln's? When in that scene with the black, well, I guess they're not technically called slaves anymore at that point, but what would you call them? Really, they kind of are. Um, the scene with the black people. I
Mm-hmm.
don't know how else to describe it. Where the quote unquote educated one discovers the book of hymns that's really communist propaganda.
Yeah,
Is that Lincoln's writing?
I don't know if it's explicitly stated. I know if not now, later, it is explicitly stated that Lincoln's writings is also propagating throughout the South.
Well, if that's
But
not it, then what writings are you talking about?
it's either Karl Marx or Lincoln.
I didn't catch that then.
So they do mention the Red Writings, and it's a little unclear. It's either Karl Marx's writings that they're reading when that guy's on it, or if it's Lincoln.
I do remember one part with the socialist writings where I can't remember the specific line, but it essentially oh god, I can't remember it actually at all how to even describe it, but it was talking about how Karl Marx was in the South and it was like a shock or something. I don't know. I read the line and I took note of it mentally because I was like, this line low-key doesn't make any sense. I think it was poorly written. But now that I think about it, I can't remember it, of course.
Now, so
should have made a note.
Not Cincinnatus. It's the other guy, the one that's the slave of the plantation with the art lady.
Yeah. Oh god, what's his name? Scipio, isn't it? No, is it Scipio?
Yeah, Scipio. It is.
Yeah. Also, side note, I think it's just so funny how I'm just gonna call them slaves because they're basically slaves. All the slaves are called, all their names are like Greek or Roman influenced.
Well,
So
they
funny.
mentioned it when Cincinnatus goes to get like paid for the day. The guy stops him and he's like, "Why do all of you have such, highfalutin names?" And he's like, "Because we're only allowed to have the one, so you got to make the most of it."
Yeah,
No,
I
Because
still think
they
it's
don't have
just so
last
funny. They all have very classical names.
Yeah,
I believe
they're
that happened in like the OTL, the original timeline as well.
Oh, did it?
I believe so.
I mean, I don't remember learning about
Oh,
anyone.
do you think that
like
the American historical like education system would have told you about that? Oh, by the way, the blacks, they didn't have a middle name.
Well, I'm not saying about that specific facet of society. I'm saying that if there was anyone with names like those, they clearly never made it to the history books. They weren't no Frederick Douglass or anything like that, you know?
Unlike Frederick Douglass.
Exactly.
I believe there were some. I'd have to look it up, but yeah. But also keep in mind that in the original timeline, like the Civil War ends in like Confederate defeat.
Yes.
But in this line, like, blacks are continued to be disenfranchised. I don't know how much of it is discussed in this book, but in the original timeline, a lot of blacks ended up fleeing to Canada after the Revolution, and I'd imagine that in this sort of timeline where the Union lost in 1880s, that all of the remaining blacks in America would have also defected to Canada. Because like they talk about like going on like lynchings, they call it something else, like something N-word hunts or something in the North that just aren't really common anymore, which makes it seems like the North just doesn't have any black people anymore.
Yeah, they do mention how there's only like a handful left.
Mm-hmm.
That's another interesting thing that I noticed while I was reading that I thought was kind of funny is that clearly the South is racist, right? They hate their black people, but they tolerate them as a part of normal society. Bro, the North is put to be so racist. I actually think they're more racist than the Southerners in this book.
And that's an interesting dichotomy that I remember being at that bar and I was writing that note, and then I was like, well, wait a minute, that one Union captain or whatever was like, he asked Cincinnatus like permission for something or other,
and they thought that was like some big novelty that he even bothered to ask.
Yeah, it's like, what are you asking me for my permission, or I don't know how to feel about this, because the South, they don't ask, they just tell you to do something.
Yeah.
And it's such a twisted thing where the South in general, they know how to like they have familiarity with the black populace, but the North, like part of them, like they're using them as essential like construction workers or like field hands. They talk about that, but
The-
other people in the North just see them as like just some dudes, and they're just like, "Hey, can you do this?" Like they ask instead of tell.
Well, I think that's kind of just on an individual basis. Like there are some good Northerners, and there are some not good Southerners, but better ones. In the first chapter, we get that scene where they're coming. The main character at the time, the George or whatever, is coming into port with a fishing boat, and someone on the dock sees the black crew member and is literally cussing him out and calling him the N word repeatedly and saying how he should be dead and everything. Like, and that just seemed to put a sort of foundation on what Northern society is in terms of viewing black people on the whole. Now, clearly, there
Yeah,
is some
because
individual
they blame
differences.
them.
Yeah, exactly, because they blame them for the loss of the Civil War and the Second Mexican War. It's made their society more racist in the end, I would say, versus the Southern.
Rest in peace, Republican Party.
What's that?
Rest in peace, Republican Party.
And yet they still exist somehow, which I thought was also interesting.
Have you heard any of the Republicans yet?
They've been mentioned.
I don't know if they've been mentioned, but the two major parties in this, like so far, are the Democrats and the Socialists.
Yes, those are the major parties, but the Republicans are still mentioned because I think it's in the POV of the socialist main character, Flora, where she mentions that I think it's when she's having that fight about the Socialist Party voting for the war fund. I think the other dude she was talking with was like, if we don't vote for the war fund, we're going to lose a lot of socialists, and they'll go back to the Republican Party.
Mm-hmm. Which
So they
is a
clearly still
very,
exist.
yes, it's a very unique timeline, I think, in terms of like political history, because it's clearly the Democrats are the ones in charge,
Mm-hmm.
and just everyone else is fighting over like the leftovers.
Right.
What are your thoughts?
I'm waiting to see if Roosevelt's going to make an appearance in this
Well,
narrative.
they've talked about him a couple times, but he hasn't actually shown up yet.
Right.
You know who has shown up?
Custer.
Wilson.
Oh yes, Wilson.
Oh, Woodrow Wilson.
I hate Wilson in real life. His real life history. He was a terrible president.
He was a terrible historian.
That too. He was
What
a
do you mean
terrible person
historian?
in general.
He was a historian before he was president. He was the first, like, he was one of the first, like, modern historians with the title of historian.
Oh really?
Yes.
That's funny.
He was one of the people that founded the Lost Cause myth, actually.
Well, yeah,
was
because
him.
he played that KKK movie in the White House.
What?
What's it called?
So the
I
reason
can't remember
why
the name, but whatever.
his Birth of a Nation.
Birth of a Nation. That's it. Yeah.
So he was the son of a Yankee who ended up marrying some lady, some Southern belle, and ended up getting indoctrinated. The children being Wilson, and ended up getting indoctrinated into that in our timeline. But then in this timeline, I don't know how much y'all got out of the speech, if you remember it, but like, what were y'all's thoughts on like Wilson's justification of war?
I didn't really take any notes on his speech, so I don't really remember it too much.
Is it that scene before the war actually starts where he's talking to the big crowd of?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. If I remember correctly, wasn't it basically that they're joining this war to make good on their word for the alliances that they've joined?
No, that was the U.S. That did that. But Wilson claims it was for the rights of small nations.
Oh, right, because of Serbia.
Kind of like states' rights, one might say. Although, kind
States'
of
rights to what?
went at it. I mean, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense. Because you know who are not small nations? Britain and France.
Britain, France, and Russia.
You know
What?
who is a small nation? Germany. Like, in terms of, like,
I mean,
being birthed. Like, I read small nation as, like, in terms of, like, power balance sort of thing.
mm-hmm.
What are your thoughts, Tim?
Well, like I said, I didn't take any notes on the actual speech, but I mean, yeah, they were talking about uh, why they wanted to get into the war. It was for the power of small states, but was he talking about the Confederate States, or was he more talking about, like, at large, the, the European nations, because that's who were, aiding him, and so ultimately was he trying to, third party it and give more power over to his, benefactors.
Mm-hmm. It's a very interesting take. I'm sure if I spent more time,
I
we
mean,
could.
I would say his take was just a political convenience because I mean, yeah, Serbia is a small nation compared to the rest of Europe, but especially at the time of World War One. But it's kind of like how I mean he's just using Serbia as a scapegoat as an excuse to go into war because I mean frankly the CSA and the USA are have been constantly vying against each other preparing for the next war since the last one. So
Mm-hmm.
it's just a political move, you know. It's a lie essentially.
And
Excuse.
and so speaking of like the Union and the Confederacy, you know, being at each other's throats, I really feel like that's kind of what makes this different than the original timeline, not just like in terms of America's divided, but also like I don't know how militarized the border between like France and Germany was, but I don't think it was as militarized as the border between the United States and Confederacy could have possibly been.
Hmm.
Like that's the immediate vibe I got out of this, where like in this book you're talking about like, you know, they fight through towns, they fight through farmhouses and all these things, where it seemed like in the European conflict, like they kind of get bogged down in like farm in the middle of nowhere kind of thing, where
Yeah.
there are cities that have been built up around these areas that are suddenly like being like besieged, like attacked from and stuff.
I mean, if I remember correctly, the Germans went pretty hard against the French initially and almost took Paris real quick until the French made a comeback.
They talk about that. Did you hear that? The talking about the
Oh
French.
yeah, yeah. They mentioned the failed German offensive or something.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Which means the European side of the war is going exactly as our timeline did.
Yes. So I'm going to assume that the European theater is going to progress almost exactly how it does in our timeline, up until the point where in our timeline the U.S. joins the war and sends their forces in to reinforce the Western Front. Though
Yeah,
at the same time, because the U.S. in the alternate timeline is putting so much pressure on Britain with the
exactly.
with the Sandwich Isles, with Hawaii and stuff, maybe that could make a difference. I'm not really sure, but
It certainly doesn't seem like the British put a lot of like troops in Canada, getting given how fast they seem to be steamrolled.
is it? Well, that's the thing. Is it that there's not a lot of troops, or is it that the Canadian troops are kind of suck?
Well, so here's the OTL, our timeline. Um, have you ever heard of War Plan Red?
No. Well, maybe, but I don't recognize it. No.
Tim, have you heard of it?
I have not.
So this was a war plan that the United States made after World War One. Because after World War One, the only real rival to the United States was the British Empire. And so they did war games. They made war plans for pretty much every single possible contingency. Which in this timeline, the Germans teach them to do. If you caught that in the last book, where the Germans like, what, you don't have war plans for literally every single country possible like we do?
Yeah.
Why? And the United States like, that's a good idea. Maybe we should do that. So in our timeline, War Plan Red, I think it was leaked in the 80s or something, well after like it would have mattered. But the United States had war games and war plans set for taking Canada. And Canada had a war plan of their own that depended on the British reinforcing them, essentially. The Canadians, I believe, I hope I'm not misquoting, but I believe the Canadians were like, yeah, we'll just invade all throughout our border, just like pepper them constantly. And the Union, the U.S., they won't know what to do because like all their country will be invaded from all areas. But the whole point was the Canadians were like, okay, the only way we could win this though is if we like spread across the border in the United States and they get bogged down there until the British can reinforce us. That was their plan. You know what the British were gonna do?
Leave Canada, I'm guessing.
Nothing. They were going to do jack shit.
Oh,
It was
typical
also
British.
eventually that like the Britons had already written off that it would be a lost cause to reinforce Canada. So Canada's defense plan, I think it was Defense Plan 1, I believe it was the term for it, would have failed drastically.
Damn, we missed our shot. We should have just done it.
Maybe we will in this timeline. But the American plan was like taking Halifax, taking all of the coast cities so Britain couldn't possibly reinforce. Because the Americans knew with their population that they could overrun Canada.
Yeah.
Pretty much all of the Canadian towns with any meaningful population are on the U.S. border, if you didn't know that.
Yes.
I think it's like 60 to 80% of all of Canadians live within
X amount of miles from the border.
Yeah, exactly. And so like if the Americans knew if they could take that, that's like GG. They could if they take the ports and they take that, there's nothing the British could possibly do. The British learned that in the Revolutionary War, it's really hard to keep just resupplying troops across the continent, especially in a world without like airplanes that could ferry troops. And so I think we're kind of...
They made mention of supply lines in this too, how one side has like a designated rail system and the other one are still using like horse-drawn carts to get their supplies around, and they said that the rail systems are essentially cheating.
Yeah, I think that was the Canadians that were saying like, well, we might have a shot against the United States because they're invading and they don't have rail systems, but we do.
Right.
But Canada has only a finite amount of, humans.
But they got moose, they got bears.
They do. They will weaponize the moose and the bears.
But can they rally them to their cause? That's the question.
So one of the things, speaking about American culture, that y'all did not miss was the American seal is different in this timeline.
Seal?
Yes, in our
Yeah,
timeline.
it's two crossed swords with an eagle,
Yes,
or
an eagle holding two swords. Do you know what the American seal is in our timeline?
is it not just the eagle?
It's an eagle holding two things.
Is it the laurel and the arrow
Isn't
bunch?
it arrows?
Yes, it's the arrows and the laurel bunch. And I believe the laurels are in the right hand, saying that the United States prefers peace, but they will go to war if need be, because the arrows are in the left hand. But in this timeline, the United States has no more laurels.
It's just two swords.
Yes.
It's all attack all the time.
It is only war. War is the only option.
Conquer!
And I think that's the most telling difference in terms of like this timeline's culture for America is there's no peace was never an option sort of thing.
Yeah.
Peace was never an option.
Mm-hmm.
War never changes.
And so I think we kind of see the fruits of that where the United States has been beaten twice and they've like, all right, we're just going to be a military. That's just who we're going to be right now.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe that's why after two losses, why they're steamrolling so quickly.
Yeah, they're certainly doing like a pre-blitzkrieg, it seems.
The South is just, and I don't know if you got this, but the South seems very arrogant about it.
Oh, 100%. The interesting thing, though, is that all of their good generals are dead now. Like, all their current leadership is untested in war. Most of them, I should say.
What about Jeb Stuart III?
That's why I said most of them, because I remembered him. Though, I mean, I don't know. They bombarded Washington, D.C. into smithereens, so he seems to be doing all right on his front.
Oh, well, you know that the Confederates own D.C., right?
Yeah.
I think the chapter 4, they own D.C., like they've conquered it. They're Confederate soldiers, capital.
Yeah, they occupied it, yeah.
Well, that was like the first thing they took.
Yeah, exactly, because it's right there.
Yeah.
But also, the U.S., I think they say like for like 10, 20, 30 years, the U.S. hasn't even used D.C. as like an actual capital. Like it's like,
right.
It's like figurehead capital, but like I think it says something like all the politicians moved out like 10 years ago.
Yeah, they do their
because
was
of
it
how
Pennsylvania
close it is.
that they said they did their stuff?
I believe.
One thing I've been waiting for a chance to use this quote, but we were talking about the generals again, and I have one from our boy General Custer. He said, "Machine guns are very well for mowing down savages, but properly trained and disciplined troops shouldn't be very leery of them." So yeah,
that's just
like
so
machine
crazy
guns are all
to me.
good. But, like, our boys, they shouldn't worry about them. They'll be fine.
It's just so crazy to me, especially considering how he saw how effective the Gatling guns were in that final battle against the British in the last war. Like, bro. Such a boomer.
Like, you should know.
I think it's a very interesting and very knowledgeable take on human psychology.
Yeah.
Custer never wanted the Gatling guns. And so he has convinced himself, it seems like he has convinced himself the Gatling guns never really mattered. Because the Gatling guns hit the victory the battle that made him famous. We're not mowing down savages, quote unquote. They're mowing down British regulars.
Yeah.
But since he consider the Gatling guns cowardice since he considered them not the right way to fight war. He has twisted his memory of that event to say, oh, no, it'll only work on savages. So let's just, the Americans, we don't need to worry about that because we're built Ford tough.
Well, see, speaking of just more of wartime innovations, they were also talking about like the novelty of having aeroplanes.
Mm-hmm.
And there was another quote that I saw that it was, you can't take aeroplanes as serious tools of war. In 5 years' time, they will be forgotten.
Exactly.
Crazy.
What a,
Uh,
what a
yeah,
boomer.
What a
and
boomer,
just
that's right.
they've already shown how important they are for reconnaissance purposes, because um yeah, they did some like light bombing runs,
Mhm.
but they were inaccurate and they were, could only hold, however many they could hold. But they were primarily shown being used as reconnaissance, scouting out the enemy trenches, drawing up maps of where their artillery emplacements are. And that information alone is so incredibly valuable. And it's
Mhm.
crazy that they are actively overlooking them as just novelties.
So, and this is one of the things that's kind of sped up. In our timeline, I'm looking up on Wikipedia, which is the most trusted source.
Of course.
Um, so the first ever recorded use of like planes bombing things was 1911 during the Italian-Turkish War
Yes.
in Libya,
Yes.
where some guy dropped 4 hand grenades down.
Wild man.
They seem to be a little bit past that in this timeline, considering they've got designated like troops that are doing that or planes that are doing that for the Confederates.
Well, they're still really just throwing bombs out the side. They're not designated bombers as of yet.
Yeah, like I said, there doesn't seem to be any real Air Force yet. It seems to be individual planes doing individual things versus a like branch of the military type deal. Like
Well,
we'll get later on in World War One.
there was a I don't remember the exact quote, but it was the scout over the let's say the Canadian lines.
Jonathan
Any
Moss.
Yeah, and he was saying that um he was, figuratively and literally above the war. And then
Mm-hmm.
he likened it to being a knight compared
Yeah,
to like a peasant soldier.
Yes.
yeah. And I think that's and I believe that reflects how the war initially was viewed in our timeline, where there was honor in the skies, where it was
Yeah, it
one
was the
combat.
World War One was the great adventure. It
Mm-hmm.
was like oh, let's go to war. It will be great.
But like, and the troops, like on the ground, they're getting mowed down with machine guns, but in the sky, it's like single combat kind of thing.
Hmm.
Which
I
is
did think it was interesting that his little pusher airplane had a Maxim mounted on its nose.
And I think
mm-hmm.
That
that is
was
German. That is a German influence.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, because that's incredibly rare to have, this early stage already have machine gun mounted airplanes when they're still considered, such a rarity. I thought that was something to take note of.
And something I will say is that they are not mounted in the front.
No, but the Scouts was
No.
because the type of aircraft he has, it's a single seater because
Right.
his was
So
a pusher aircraft.
right, but I believe right. So
No, I
the
believe they were
gunfire.
mounted. I believe they were mounted on the top, like the German tri-wings had in our timeline.
So have y'all looked up a picture of what the aircraft he was using looks like?
The
It's
pushers.
essentially it it's like a bicycle with wings. So there's not really a whole lot of anything to it.
He was flying a pusher, I believe.
Yeah, it was like a Hudson super pusher.
Mm-hmm. And so that will be a because the disruptor gear, you know what that is, Tim, right?
Yes, it's so you don't shoot your own propellers.
Yes, that has not been invented yet in our timeline because they make a big deal when it will. Spoiler alert, be invented. But I believe in this timeline, like he has his engine in the back,
Yeah.
and so he's able to
Well,
pull.
when he meets that other plane in the sky, um they also have forward mounted machine guns, but then he says that his co-pilot, once they pass by him, he's just wildly firing with a pistol out the
Mm-hmm.
back.
Yeah, so like the other side has 2-seater, but I believe he was in a 1-seater plane,
Yes.
which is great. I love that. I love Jonathan Moss. He's one of my characters. Um, so the air war maybe has been advanced a little bit. Like they're clearly out of the gate. Oh, we're gonna shoot other planes. That's like we've got the machine guns mounted. That's how it's gonna go. I
That's a
believe
thing
in
to do,
World War
yeah.
One, like initially they were mostly used for scouting, right?
Yes.
But like it seems like in this they're a little bit sped up. Like, oh, we're gonna kill other planes.
Yeah, so they were primarily used for scouting, but as they found, better uses for them, they could start mounting heavier engines, which allowed them to mount, more bombs or heavier machine guns or more armor for protection or more seats for more people.
Mm-hmm.
But yes, if it's trending the way that it sounds like, they are speeding up rapidly.
If they're speeding up with that technology, it kind of makes me wonder what other technologies are going to speed up with. Because clearly tanks are going to make a presence here.
Yeah.
Maybe not
Are
in
they
this
going to be
book,
called
but
tanks?
who knows? In our timeline, it's the British who invent them first.
You
I
know why
wonder.
they're called tanks?
No, I don't. Well, I'm sure. I don't know.
Tell him.
Because they were the wasn't it like water tanks or something they were
Yeah.
saying they looked like?
Yeah. No. Well, so in the supply like manifests, they said, "Oh no, we're just shipping water tanks to the front."
Mm.
They were called tanks because they were disguised like in case of like German spies as like being no tanks as in like the things that hold water.
Right.
But I wonder in this timeline will the British still be the ones that get them
That is the
first?
question. And how advanced will these tanks be?
Mm-hmm. What am I looking at? I'm looking at my notes now. Finally. Did y'all catch the name drop for Dr. Pepper, by the way?
Yes. I was like, all right. Give me that
No, I
southern
missed
drink.
that.
It's Cincinnatus was given a Dr. Pepper by the dude he
Oh,
was
yeah, okay,
working for
yes,
in the
yes, yes, I
warehouse. Yeah,
remember
yeah.
that now, yeah.
Yeah, I'm not gonna
Speaking of,
lie.
I'm
Reading that
thirsty.
kind of made me want a Dr. Pepper. It still blows my mind that Dr. Pepper existed so early in history, relatively. That I mean,
Well,
cause
if we're
Hola.
gonna be sticking over in Germany, Fanta's gonna be invented pretty soon.
yeah, it's just crazy
By the
because
Nazis?
18. I think Dr. Pepper was 1886, right, or something like that. So
It was like 2 years. Look,
I think it was 1886. and which means so obviously we didn't see any of it in the last book. So like soda is a foreign concept, and then now it's just reading about such a modern concept in like an old timey vibe is just crazy to me.
1880, Dr. Pepper was invented in Waco, Texas.
Oh, 1880?
Yeah.
Oh,
Yep.
so it could have been in the Second Mexican War in the last book, but they didn't mention it.
I will say, unfortunately, I believe that in this timeline, this will be the last book that talks about Dr. Pepper.
Sad.
Bad.
Yeah, it's. I agree. It's
I
kind
guess it was
of
a
a
sponsorship.
it's kind of a miscite on Turtledove, I think. That like there's no fucking way that Dr. Pepper would have still been invented and called Dr. Pepper with
Why?
all of the changes. Well, with all the changes to American history, you know, like kind of the butterfly sort of effect. There's no way it would have just been called Dr. Pepper still.
But I mean, the drink was invented by a Confederate soldier, wasn't it? A Confederate, someone who fought for the Confederacy.
I'm gonna look it up. Hold on.
In fact, I'm pretty sure most of our sodas were made by Confederates, people who fought for the Confederacy. I know Dr. Pepper was. I think Coca-Cola was too, which is why it's based in Atlanta.
We have not heard any mention of Coca-Cola. Dr. Pepper's supremacy for the win.
That's right. Best drink.
He had to be sponsored so he could publish the book.
Exactly. It sponsored his whole series.
I'm trying to find. I'm trying to find the history of Dr. Pepper to see who created this drink.
Lizzie and I went to the Dr. Pepper Museum about 2 years ago.
In Dublin?
No, it was in Texas somewhere.
Well, yeah, Dublin,
was...
Dublin, Texas.
Oh, well, yeah, okay, yeah. I was thinking
Probably
Ireland.
in Waco.
Yeah.
I assume.
No,
well,
but
Dublin,
it was
Dublin,
good.
Texas claims to have the original creation of the soda. It was a big court case like 10 years ago.
Oh, really?
Yeah, because they had the Dr. Pepper name on their bottles, and then Dr. Pepper Snapple sued them because of that, and they ended up winning, of course, sadly. The big corporation won. Shocker.
I'm reading.
At the Dr. Pepper factory, though, they had exclusive flavors that weren't sold anywhere else.
How were
like,
they?
There was the one I got was like a blue raspberry Dr. Pepper.
Whoa.
And it was pretty good.
That sounds crazy.
Uh-huh.
You might need to get Ellen on that, huh?
Why?
She likes Dr. Pepper.
She only drinks Dr. Pepper Zero with Fireball.
Imagine how much more experience to the taste buds Dr. Pepper Blue Raspberry would have been.
It
knows if
is
she would
like
she doesn't like soda for soda, you know. She only mixes it with her. Wow.
Well, no, I'm mixing the Blue Raspberry Dr. Pepper for whiskey. I think that would be an experience.
They did have like the classical soda jerks. So it was, you know, like carbonated water mixed with syrups and everything, and they would all stir it by hand and everything. So it was fancy.
Yeah, I had something like that when I went to Galveston the other year for Coca-Cola. They had like I guess an ice cream shop or something that still made sodas the original way.
We don't drink Coca-Cola around these parts, son. Let me look at my book tabs here. What other notes did you take, Tim?
Let me see. like I
No,
said, they're all kind of
no.
over the place. I have that the Americans pushing into Ontario, Canada from New York, with the
Mm-hmm.
Canadians and the British struggling to stop them. I went on to talk about the biplane that we just went over. I have a quote where I don't reckon aerial bombs will ever amount to much.
Mm-hmm.
I thought that was pretty funny.
Yeah.
Also, the Americans that took 10 random hostages from a town because of the mysterious death of one soldier, and they were like, "Yeah, we're just gonna kill you if you don't, or these hostages if we don't find out who did it."
Yeah.
So,
Oh
like, are Americas the baddies?
Well, we're allied
no,
with the Germans. What do you think?
I don't know if the Germans are baddies in World War One.
No, but it's a sign of things to come, I think.
Oh, you think that the United States is going to be allied with the Hitlerites?
I don't know, maybe. Especially if they end up losing this war along with Germany.
Oh my gosh! Imagine if the United States lost
Bro,
three wars in a row.
3 for 3 L's. That'd be insane. Like part of me is like they have to win this surely because it's like their third time. But then another part of me is like if I
Just
mean
kick them in the dirt one more time.
right. I don't know. It's honestly
Who
a
do you
toss up this time.
who do you think's going to win the war, Tim?
So, the United States has a whole lot of momentum right now,
Mm-hmm.
and the CSA, even being backed by the French and the English, and the Canadians up north, are struggling against them. However,
The
I
more
the deeper they push, the harder it is gonna get with their supply lines. You know, the less manpower they're gonna have. So eventually they're gonna hit a brick wall, but I don't know where it is.
What are your thoughts, Daniel? Who do you think is going to win?
Like I said, it's kind
If
of
you
a
had to,
50-50 toss up
if
because
you had to bet right now, who's going to win?
just based off these 5 chapters, I would have to
Mhm.
say the US is going to win. However, I mean, I don't know because clearly there is some foreshadowing that's been placed in these first 5 chapters that are going to spell some disasters or hardship for the Union, and that could affect the whole war. You know, all it takes is one setback and ruins the whole offensive momentum that they've had. But so there's that foreshadowing. There's also the fact that the Confederates technically have the better ally playlist than the Unions do. I mean they have Britain and France, two of the biggest empires at the time, against Germany, or not just Britain and France. They have Russia too against Germany and the U.S. And I mean, technically
Do they
speaking, the U.S. and
officially
Germany are
have
outnumbered.
Germany
There's
or
no way they
Russia?
should be able to logistically win this war. Now they're doing good in the beginning, but it's possible the CSA can come back from this. I don't know. It's such a freaking toss up. I can't decide.
If you had, all right. So first, I go back to Tim.
Yeah.
So you're saying like you think that the Union might get or the U.S. might get bogged down as they advance further.
Yes, it's the only logical thing. They have a whole bunch of momentum on them, so they're keeping the streak going.
Mm-hmm.
But like I said, their supply lines are running thin. Yes, they got the manpower, but as they keep pushing further and further into Canada, they're noticing that their trench systems are getting more and more complex and more fortified, with more artillery support. So eventually they're just not gonna have the numbers or not gonna have the manpower
Yeah,
to
eventually things are going to get bogged down
force.
like in real World War One, and we're going to have attrition warfare.
Yeah.
So, what would happen if that took place? If if it was, I guess, like a negotiated peace.
No
Let's say no.
negotiated peace.
What would that look like?
No what?
If no one makes ground past this point?
Hmm.
Because, like in our timeline, the Germans lose. Like they just lose.
Right.
But if everyone gets bogged down on every front, there's no Americans coming to the rescue. What does the world look like of a negotiated peace?
Well, would the United States keep the Canadian territory that they've seized?
Or what if the U.S. was convinced, because after, I'm assuming, years and years of this bogged down war, what if the U.S. is convinced to forcibly give up whatever lands they conquered in order to return to the status quo?
That's possible, but then
And
wouldn't
that
the
leads to them
US
becoming
people
Hitler.
yeah, I was gonna say, wouldn't the US people still see that as like being cowed? And so
Yes.
they, even though it was, a non-aggression pact or like some sort of peace treaty, the American people would still see that as another L.
Yes. And so begins the Hitler era, but America. And maybe FDR becomes our Hitler, who knows? Am I guessing all the right guesses, Chris?
I don't know. We have left off one major part of this book, which is Quebec.
Damn French, who
Gosh.
cares?
The Quebecois.
Quebecese.
The Quebecese. What about
So the guy that I can't remember his name, the guy that talks to his horse a lot.
talks to his horse a lot? Oh, the merchant?
Yeah, the guy that
Is
sold
that the
chicken.
merchant?
Yes, yes, yes. What about him?
So the Americans are advancing very far into Quebecois territory. And Quebec, as you might know, has had major separatist roots, which they talk about in this book, that they've kind of been like quashed because they have a major aggressor to their south, which is the United States. And they're like, oh, yeah, before the United States, we weren't unified, which is the entirety of Canada, by the way. The Canadians unified in response to the Civil War out of fear of the Union invading up north.
Huh.
That's why I don't know if it was the Act of Dominion or what it was called. But like right after the Civil War ended, Canada like became more federalized. It didn't become a country until separate from the British Empire until like the 70s or 80s, actually, which is wild to think about. But
Really?
yeah, it was like pretty recent where like they had their whole constitution and thing, and like they developed their flag and stuff. But that's just because we are all old men now. In the time of this book, it was still fairly recent. But anyway, in this book series, they talk about how like the Quebecois used to be like very separatist from the rest of Quebec or the rest of Canada, but they have all been united in their fear of the Yankees, of the Americans. And so I guess my question is like, what do you think's going to happen to Canada? Like, where do you think the line's going to be drawn? Like, we've got two POV Canadian characters. We've got Arthur McGregor, and we've got the horse guy. I love the horse guy.
So much that you know his name.
It's
some
escaping
French
me.
name. Who cares?
It doesn't make sense anyway.
Exactly.
Look, my mother's side of the family may be descended from his line, the Acadians, but still.
Is McGregor anyone of import in our real timeline? Or like, do we have any Mark Twains in this book that I'm just not recognizing?
I meant to look that up.
But you didn't.
Canadian Mark Twain.
Canadian Mark.
Oh, wait. No way.
What?
No, okay, that's a modern guy. Hold on. Okay. Doesn't look like Arthur McGregor is a real person in our timeline.
Okay.
Or like of historical significance, I mean. There was an Arthur McGregor that was like a British academic, but that would not fit our criteria.
No.
So no, this is just some guy named Arthur McGregor.
Well then.
But I thought something ominous about the Americans were that in Manitoba for Arthur McGregor's like POV, he's like, wait, this stamp looks funny. And he looks at it closely, he's like, wait, this eagle has two swords. What is this? And the post office guy's like, we're in occupied territory now, sir.
Yeah, I can't send out any mail if it doesn't have this on it.
Yeah, and also it'll be passed through a ton of sensors.
Oh yeah.
And so
Right.
that's when Arthur McGregor realizes, oh shit, these Americans are planting down roots, huh? Or at least they perceive themselves as planting down roots.
This is America now.
You will all use freedom units going forward.
It's the America we could have had.
If only the American Revolution had gone differently. If only that siege of Quebec had gone.
Oh, we were so close.
Oh my god. Fucking smallpox. It's always smallpox. But yes, so Tim, if you had to place a side on a bet on who would win, who would you bet?
Narratively speaking, the only way I can see this working as like a continuing series would be the USA. Because if the CSA just won again, then there would be no more USA. Unless that's the route they're taking, and so the USA is just completely gone, and every territory is now the Confederate States. Then how does the Confederate States go into World War II? Or do they keep up the isolationism that was originally supposed to be there? You know, they did talk briefly about Japan and English being I don't know if they were allies, but they were at least, had trades. So if the CSA is still allied with England, then why would Japan ever bomb Pearl Harbor? So would the CSA even have any desire to get into World War II?
Mm.
Or is it a completely different set of things that kick it off?
Do either of y'all know what Japan was doing in World War One?
Yeah, they were fighting on the side of the Allies against Germany occupied China, or German
Mm-hmm.
colonized parts of China, I should say. They were, yeah,
They were really big buddies with
with
the
Britain.
British, by the way.
Yep.
And what if they just kicked the U.S. in the teeth anyway?
Would that solidify that, partnership so that they would no longer be on opposite ends?
Mm-hmm.
But with English, Russian, French, and Japanese against Germany, they
And the United States,
and the United States,
and
then
Austria, and the Ottomans.
then
Don't forget
Germany
the
just
sick man of
stands no
Europe.
chance during World War II.
You're forgetting the sick man of Europe. I mean, the Ottomans.
Of course. Who could forget the Ottomans?
I mean, many people do, and that's okay.
Everyone remembers the Italians because they make good pastas.
Oh my gosh, your city's so beautiful. Oh my gosh. The way they say in Venice, the way that they saved all of that Christian art from what would have been an Ottoman conquest, beautiful. It's too bad they had to make Constantinople fall to get that art.
To make that, yeah.
But yeah, so like the lines have definitely been drawn. We haven't heard a whole lot about Japan. One of the most memorable scenes in this book series for me will be happening in the next or in this book, I should say. Next couple chapters, because they will go more into the Sandwich Islands campaign. Or I guess battle, I don't know how to say it. Because as far as we know, they have taken like the docks. Like they have started their invasion. But they do not own the islands yet, right?
Mm-hmm.
So something similar to that tide that I had written down was the Americans, the United States is over investment in river transportation and river monitors, where they built up such a great fleet in the such an amazing fleet in the Great Lakes.
Oh, but then they just get completely
Yeah,
wiped
They're
because
they're useless.
they mined them.
Yeah,
yeah,
they're useless
exactly.
because they made ships that were just one class too low for the purpose that they wanted, which was to bombard the cities, and they ended up being, you know, unable to fire from distance at the cities, like what happened during the Second Mexican War.
Well, I mean, they can
Crazy.
fire cities, but the problem is that like they didn't account for the fucking mines.
Well, no, because what I understood from that chapter is that the Great Lakes fleet was made, I guess, a lower tier than, for example, the fleet that took Hawaii, because they
Mm-hmm.
clearly don't have the guns to fire at a distance against a town like they
And
did
so,
in Hawaii.
so the issue here is, I can't remember what character it is, but he says that actually the United States invested very heavily in the Great Lakes fleet.
Yeah.
Yes, they spent
They
a lot of money, but was that efficient? Is the
No.
thing you have to ask, I guess.
because, and it seems like the issue is because of the mines. They did not, because they talk about like 2 great warships just dying, like just
Yep.
full steaming into the minefield, and gone, and like everyone else was like super cowardly, and it
Well,
seemed
they also mentioned that the Canadians had a what was it, a U-boat or some sort of submersible.
Oh yeah, they
yes.
have submarines.
Yeah, and so they were also saying, so in addition to all the mines, they can't find that sub that keeps taking them out.
Mhm.
I'm guessing the U.S.
Das
doesn't have subs then.
At least not in the Great Lakes.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, the first sub was a Confederate sub, right?
Oh really?
Like in the timeline, yeah.
In World War in the
Everyone,
Civil War?
yes, everyone died. It got sunk in the bottom, and everyone suffocated.
Oh, LOL.
Oh.
Rip.
Yeah, but the Americans, I mean, North and South, were the pioneers of submarine warfare.
Interesting. Honestly, I would have thought it would have been the Germans just because of their overuse of the U-boat in World War One and
I
World War
didn't say
Two.
pioneers. I said pioneers. I did not say successful
Oh,
pioneers.
well then.
We're nothing but, innovative. That doesn't mean we're good at it.
We were the shoulders. The Germans were the giants that they stood upon.
Gotcha.
No, I believe it was the Confederates that invented the idea of, or the modern idea of the submarine. There were like
the superiority of the Southern mind, if I must say.
There were single man submersible ideas and kind of practicality that were used in the American Revolution.
Oh,
But yeah, like single man things, like you pedal a bicycle kind of thing, and you move your thing. Like it was really bad. It didn't do a whole lot of good, and then the world kind of slept on it. But in the original timeline, the Confederates were the first to use an actual submarine. Let me look up what it was called.
the CSA suicide.
H.L. Hutley. The CSS Hutley.
CSS, that's right.
It was the Confederates were the first submarine nation, I guess, that sunk a ship in combat.
Wait, say that again?
The CSS, the Confederate States of America Naval Force or whatever.
Yeah.
They made the first combat submarine that sunk a warship in history.
Oh, so it did do something. It didn't just drown itself.
I mean, it drowned itself like after, but like, I believe the original designer like drowned in the submarine because he was like, "No, I want to be in I want to be in the sub. It's fine." And like they drowned in the bottom of the like whatever river. But obviously the Confederacy lost in our timeline, so the submersible was not super effective in combat.
Right. Well, the fact that it still sunk a ship though in the 1860s is still actually pretty fucking impressive, I must say.
Yeah. And so I wonder how submersibles might play a role in this war.
Yeah. Well, I mean, they were decently used in World War One in our timeline, so I wouldn't be surprised if they're used well in this one too.
Mm-hmm.
What else is there to talk about these 5 chapters?
These amazing chapters of an amazing book.
Mm.
What other notes did you have, Tim?
That's what I'm looking at right now. Pretty much everything I have, we've gone over.
Imagine if Daniel took notes.
All my notes are in my head because I just remember what I read, you know.
Because he's too good for the
How many
written
chapters
word.
today, Daniel?
What's that?
How many chapters did you read today?
I read 0 chapters today because I finished it yesterday.
Yeah, how many chapters did you read yesterday?
About 2.
So I was telling Chris this, but I went to my local library and I rented the book, or I ordered the book, and so they gave it to me. But before I got it, I was looking online to see if there was like an app I could use, because I had like a library app, but they didn't have it in stock and all this. But on YouTube, there is an entire full free audiobook version of this book, if that's something you want.
I don't really do audiobooks. I just read it myself. I tend to read faster
Wow.
than audiobooks anyway.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah, because I'm skilled like that, you know what I mean?
So he's too good for the written word and the spoken word.
Exactly. Wait, written word? What are you talking about? I read.
Does you think
The
you can
digitally
read?
written word.
Well, because I don't read fucking Kindle books or whatever. Ebooks.
Audible. There was a great quote from Arthur McGregor in Manitoba that said something like, "Can I play it?" Never mind, y'all can't hear it in your speakers.
What
What?
about? Were you trying to play something?
Yes, I was. I failed, as I
Sad.
do in many. Yeah. Anyway, this guy in Quebec is talking about how the guy that talks to his horse a bunch. He's like, so this is what freedom means. Where he's reading a newspaper that's it's just talking about things like, oh yeah, and also Americans just shot a bunch of people in the streets. Oh, I see. We have been liberated.
It's
He
just
says
like
something
real
like,
life, to be honest.
he said something like, I did not know that we were under occupation. But the Americans who just shot a bunch of people in the streets have told me so. I mean, we must be free now. In case you were curious, this book series was written in the 90s, so
Oh, is it?
yeah.
Oh, different
So,
time. Honestly, I cannot imagine another book getting away with using the N-word so many times in a row.
It is quite.
Honestly crazy.
It's used a whole lot.
Yeah.
yeah, so keep in mind when you read this book series that, like, not Iraq War, not Iran War yet. have happened.
The
I
Gulf
believe
War, the
Gulf
first
War,
one.
yeah, the Gulf War has happened. And so that definitely influences Turtledove and how he writes these books. So keep an eye out for that, for just meaningless battles and a harbinger
How
of
does
pointless wars to come.
that work? Because I mean, we dominated in the Gulf War.
We sure did.
Destroyed.
Maybe Turtledove is a visionary, and he anticipates what will happen in the 2000s.
He knows nothing. He can't. He just can't relish in that sweet American victory.
He can't keep getting away with it.
That sweet unionist victory.
I never thought I'd hear those words come out of your mouth, Daniel.
They were said tongue in cheek.
It's too
man.
It's too bad Lizzie isn't here. She could tell me about Jubal early.
Yeah,
Oh,
I
wasn't
think
that talked about
she
last
just
time?
yelled at me for
Yeah,
being
so
loud, so
Isn't that like her great uncle or something? That was a
yeah, it's like her great uncle. She actually picked up a book about him. It's on our bookshelf right now.
That's honestly kind of crazy, dude. Have a
Has she read the book about her uncle?
I think so.
Jubal Early, one of the founding members of the Lost Cause myth.
He was early.
Daniel might call him a patriot.
What?
Do we have any closing thoughts of where we might think the next 5 chapters would go?
Well,
I would like to see more on the European front.
Yeah.
I feel like just because of what this book series is about, that we're not going to see the European front. We might hear about it from time to time in glimpses, but I doubt we'll ever actually see it.
Okay, that's a fair point.
Why would the Europeans matter? This is America, Tim.
Exactly. Though I do expect to see some German naval prowess used on the Union side, considering that the Germans seem to have their own fleet to assist the Americans.
I guess we'll have to see next time.
Oh, Dragon Ball Z.
The upgrade.
Same man.
Oh man, yeah, I expect a lot of that foreshadowing that was built up about potentially disastrous Union decisions. Like, first off, just typical of the Union, isn't it, to have generals who make the stupidest decisions because they're just fucking stupid, inept, useless beings, ruining the whole war effort. I have a feeling the next 5 chapters are gonna kind of delve into that, and we'll start seeing a swing in the narrative, perhaps maybe a a a, a comeback from the CSA and or Canada.
Well, we are on book 1.
Yeah, that's true, I guess. Damn, how many books are there in this shit?
So many. Like 50. For this book, look how many books there are in this series. For World War One, I mean.
So I don't know how many books are in this series in particular, but when I was looking up like all of his novels, he has like a lot. He has way more than I think it, and it's not just like alternate history. He has like fantasy books. He has
Oh yeah, he's got like a book series about like what if Grant and Lee had fucking dragons.
What? Oh my god. Bro, this guy is fucking crazy.
I'm like Turtle of Dragon. He has the Darkness series, also known as World at War. It is a 6-book fantasy by Harry Turtledove.
Is that the one where the aliens invade?
No, it is different.
Oh god.
I'll read the initial synopsis. Though a fantasy, it's general history. Geography and combatants are analogous to World War II.
And
analogous.
Yeah,
that's it.
sure.
That's the word.
I was like, what is he saying?
Magic and other fantastic beasts such as dragons are also stand-ins for World War II technology. Important battles in this series are also based on famous World War II battles. I've never read this book series. I don't know what happens, but I know that like a bunch of people like ride dragons.
That is bizarre.
How many books has he published? Let me look. Like he's done so much shit.
Oh man. It's crazy too because a lot of his books kind of deal over the same subject matter. How the fuck does someone just write the same fucking story but in a different way every single time? Kind of crazy.
How many books does he have?
I wonder if he's still writing.
He is.
No
He released
way.
a book last year. Yeah.
Oh my god, that's crazy.
How old is he then?
He's very old.
Yeah,
That's
because I looked at his like author's photo and he looked pretty old.
Really? Hmm. I thought he looked kind of like a hippie or something, but maybe I'm remembering wrong.
I'm looking at his bibliography. One of my favorite book series from him is a two-parter of what if Japan decided to hold Hawaii or the Sandwich Islands. And not to spoil it, but what Tim, what do you think would have happened if Japan had set up like bases on Hawaii?
Well, they would have had um a staging point for a potential fleet, or they could have used our airstrips to run, bombing missions against mainland USA. It could have been a staging area for ground forces to invade, like along the coast. So holding those islands would have been very beneficial to them,
If
but
they were American.
they just didn't have the ships to hold it. They didn't have the manpower to hold it. I mean, really, the surprise strike was their really only shot at it.
And so I doubt we'll ever read this book series, so I'm gonna spoil like the ending of book one. So the U.S. sends all of their carriers to Japan or to reclaim Hawaii, and they all die. Like the Americans die. But you know what the United States does?
A
Hmm.
nuke
They
Hawaii.
they just build more carriers because the United States can do that. You know who can't? Japan.
So they just
And
keep building more and sending them to their death, and then
yeah,
building more and then sending them to.
yeah, and so they just overwhelmed the Japanese.
That's actually wild.
Like, yeah, the USS Hornet, all the USS Enterprise, all of these very famous like ships die in an effort to take Hawaii in World War I or World War II, like at the end of it in Book One, and that's fine because the U.S. has so much tech, so much industry, and so much material that they can just outproduce the Japanese. And what ends up happening is like Japan ends up losing the war sooner because they dedicate so much resources to taking holding Japanese islands that they don't expand elsewhere in the Pacific, and so the U.S. just steamrolls them. It's a great book series. Anyway, he's written many books. I haven't gotten a number yet.
Well, I still kind of
So
want to
what?
read. I still kind of want to read the World War II one where the aliens invade. That one
Oh,
sounds
it's a great book
crazy.
series. We can read that next if y'all are so
If
inclined.
we ever
After
if we
we
ever finish this series, yeah.
this series is much longer than the other one.
Mm.
I'm reading it. Oh, also he has an alternate history of Atlantis. Like, what if Atlantis, like the continent, was real?
Hmm.
And the whole like selling, like the takeaway of it is that there are Neanderthals that still exist, and the idea of the Neanderthals disproves race theory. And so there's no more racism in this world, because why would we separate ourselves as humans when there's an entire other species that's different than us that we can like categorize and enslave?
Hell
It's
yeah,
quite
brother.
fascinating. It's quite fascinating. It's like, Turtledove, what did you mean by that?
Honestly, though, that's a pretty common trope in sci-fi. Um, where aliens make first contact and they're hostile and they end up uniting humanity. Like that's basically Halo.
Yeah.
Yeah, but this is about Atlantis, where a bunch of colonizers are like, oh, these are actually not subhuman, they are other human.
Mm.
There's also another book series called The War That Came Early, which is it's like Hitler invades Czechoslovakia and that becomes red line, and so World War II starts like in 1938. I've heard it's not very good.
So, like, what happens then? Is it the same thing except instead of Poland, it's the Czech?
Yeah.
Does that affect much?
No, I don't think so. Like, I don't know how much about it. The last book came out in 2014 for it. Like, that was the conclusion book. I'm looking at the other books in his his bibliography. He has a young adult novel series called Agent of Byzantium, by the way.
Interesting. That sounds not bad. Wonder what that one's about.
I'll read it to you. Damn it. Hold on. There we go. Wow, what the hell? So many videos. There we go. Agent of Byzantium. A 1987 collection of short stories by Harry Turtledove, centered on the exploits of Basil Agrozov, a Byzantine secret agent. The stories are set in an alternate 14th century where Islam never existed, and the great ancient empire of Byzantium and the Saracen Persian survive.
What a wonderful world that sounds like.
I know. One can only hope. I'm sorry, I'm reading the synopsis. No, so that's his like young adult novel series. I haven't heard a lot of things about it, but I'm assuming it's good. It's like some CIA shit, but like in the 1400s.
It's kind of an interesting setting for a YA book.
Mm-hmm.
That's for sure.
Like he's written so many fucking books. Like he's. I think his like tagline is the master of alternate history, because he's just written so many things. You just pick one. Like he's got stuff about the Korean War. He's got stuff about like modern war. It's like Armageddon, like with nukes and stuff. Like there's so much shit. Anyway, so Daniel, who do you think's gonna win again?
Man, I could not tell you.
You are undecided.
I am undecided.
Tim, who do you think's gonna win?
The way I see it, the only logical sense is if the USA wins. However, I would be, I would not be upset if I was proven wrong, because that then opens up a whole new world of, okay, I have no idea what's happening next.
Well, I think the CSA is gonna win.
You
Haven't
think
you
the
read these
CSA is
series
gonna win?
already?
I support the Southern cause.
Didn't you read this book series already?
I might have.
Then you know who's gonna win.
I surely do. But I am merely postulating. I have thought very long and hard about how I should proceed in my commentary of this series. If things are wrong, I will correct them. If I see imbalance, I shall balance them.
We'll go with CSA, I guess.
Yes, exactly. Confederate
Long,
states are bust.
long live the Confederacy.
Mhm. You said it, not me. So anyway, when are we gonna get together to play Project Zomboid?
I already have the game, so.
I'm deep into playing Space Marine 2 right now, so
Oh, I've heard that one's
I
good.
don't know. I don't know when I would get around to doing Project Zomboid.
2 months.
Have you played it anymore, Chris, since last we tried?
I've watched lots of videos.
But you haven't actually played any?
No, executive dysfunction has been really hitting me hard
What's that?
in the
Just been
last.
kicking the butt.
It's an ADHD thing. It's like I can't do anything, kind of thing. Um, it's become kind of a problem. Not to get too deep into it, but I have not been able to motivate myself to actually play anything. I have watched videos of it, and I would like to know how to play the game before I invest the mental energy to play so, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And so I've been watching videos, and that's what I was doing on my way up to Caldwell. Was listening to videos. It was a 2-hour video on what to do in day 1 of Project Zomboid. And I've listened to it several times. I understand. I would like to listen to the full week at least before I invest the mental energy to play the game again. But the fun fact is, apparently, we're all just bitches because what you can do for the zombies is you just press the space bar and then you just stomp on them, and that's how you kill them, even without a weapon.
I've watched so many staying in one hotel or never leaving the starter house challenge runs of Project Zomboid.
Mm-hmm.
I saw one where it was I think every time they killed a zombie, they were allowed to go one tile. And so every time they killed someone, they would go walk one tile and then kill another one and then walk one tile. And so the only place they could freely walk was inside the starting house. Other than that, they had to kill in order to move.
That's hilarious. I watched on my way to Caldwell. I watched a playthrough where this guy lived out of a camper in the middle of a zombie apocalypse. Very much, what is that? Walking Dead season 2. But
I thought, were they not at the farm yet in season 2? I don't remember.
No, yeah, they were. The farm was season 2.
what was the camper?
The camper?
Yeah, where the guy that got eaten by the zombies. I think that was a major stay of Walking Dead season 2.
You're gonna have to be more specific. There's a lot of guys who get eaten by zombies.
The conscious of the group in the early seasons, the white guy with the beard.
Oh, yeah, that's way after. That's the farmer who owns the farm.
No,
In
not that
season
guy,
2.
but no, the guy that gets that was Glenn's surrogate father.
That's no, yeah, you're. That's the farmer from season 2 who owns the farm.
No, I'm not talking about him. I'm talking about the other guy.
No, he's the father of Maggie, who Glenn gets together with.
No, that's not
That's
who I'm talking about. He might not have a beard, but he's bald.
then I don't know who you're talking about. I don't remember Glenn having like another person who's kind of a surrogate father other than Maggie's dad.
I will send you photos. Anyway, I'm going to bed. Good night.
Yes. Okay, I'll stop recording, and I guess I'll send it to you, Chris, for whatever purposes
Will
you
you?
have.
Y'all have a good night.
Good night.
Good night.